We're back, and we're introducing the Tompkins County Court candidates on the Democratic slate. And our next candidate is Pam Bleiwas. She is a local attorney, and Pam has been practicing here for a good time. And I'm going to be asking her a few questions that she can present herself to the public, just as each judge candidate is doing. And we'll have about 25 minutes for each candidate. So we're going to start. Welcome. Good evening.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So what motivated you to become a judge candidate?
I was motivated by my experiences practicing law. I've been practicing law here in Tompkins County since 1995. I have a total of 22 years experience, but I've been here in Tompkins County since 1995. And I've been representing children and indigent adults in family court and criminal court during that time.
Okay.
And one of the things that I do is when I represent children, I get cases assigned to me from the court. And I was in court probably about 8 months ago, maybe a little bit more by now, and Judge Sherman was hearing family court cases, and he asked me to represent a baby in a custody case. And I noticed that the mother was very young and pregnant with a second child. And when the mother and I introduced ourselves to each other, I realized that I had represented her when she was 6 years old, and then again when she was 13.
Wow.
And I knew that this young woman had been in and out of foster care for her entire life. And here she was, 19 years old, with 2 children, no parenting partner, no job skills, and in a violent relationship.
Sure.
And suddenly that phrase that we hear, cycle of poverty, had a very real and human face to me. And I just wanted to do more. I wanted to be able to use the skills that I'd gained as an attorney for children and as an attorney for indigent folks in our community to be able to just help them a little bit more than I'm able to help them as an attorney.
Yeah, because that motivation, that mindset is different as an attorney versus a judge, and of course you're only allowed to do certain things as a judge. You can't necessarily advocate for those people, but your role certainly gives you the flexibility to change lives.
It definitely does, and that's a question, or that topic comes up a lot when I talk about my motivation for running. People want to know how can the judge affect the cycle of poverty?
Sure.
You know, let me say at the outset, I'm not going to be able to do everything and cure everything and solve everything, but I do see steps that we can take to try to make people's lives in our community a little bit better and to try to give our kids a little bit more hope. And a couple of examples of that have to do with when children are placed in foster care. We place children in foster care in this county, in my opinion, fairly frequently because it's my job and it's what I see. But when they're in foster care, we need to make sure that they're not only given a safe place to live, but they're also given skills to be able to live their own lives. They're taken from their parents. Oftentimes the parents are not in a position to take care of their children.
Sure.
And the state intervenes and puts them in a safe place, generally a foster home with some committed folks who want to help out. And we need to make sure that these kids are learning some basic life skills. We need to make sure, number one, that they're getting an education, that they're finishing school. A lot of my clients who I've represented as children and a lot of the children of my adult clients don't finish school when they're in foster care. We need to make sure they're finishing school. We need to make sure they're learning job skills. We have a lot of youth services here in Tompkins County, and from what I hear from youth services providers is that there is not as strong a connection between the services that are available and the court system.
Sure.
We need to make sure that these kids who we know are at risk are being recognized, identified, and directed to the youth services programs.
So in our current system, are you allowed to have the flexibility of steering them towards some of those youth services instead of sentencing?
Absolutely, and I don't know if it's necessarily instead of sentencing. I think it might be in addition to sentencing, and it comes up in a few different ways. You know, one way is in the foster care situation, the other way is in a juvenile delinquency situation, which we do have something akin to sentencing. And a third way is in the adult criminal court, because remember that in New York State, people at the age of 16 are considered adults for criminal prosecution purposes. So we need to make sure that when you have a 16-year-old offender, that we recognize that this is still a child.
Right.
And while we need to make sure that, they break their pattern of criminal behavior, we also need to remember that that's a very young person.
That's where the pins cutoff is too, right?
The pins cutoff is actually 18 at this point.
Is it 18? Okay.
The juvenile delinquency cutoff is 16.
Oh, I
And,
see.
it's a continuum up until your 16th birthday. If you commit an act that's considered a crime, you are a juvenile delinquent. Once you
Wow.
turn 16, you're
Which
you're
is a
an
pretty
adult
good
court.
label, yeah. That's
It is a big label.
So why is it important for you to have a lot of experience as an attorney?
Well, there's a few reasons why you need a lot of experience. First of all, the judge is called upon to make decisions very quickly. Trials move fast, and the judge is often asked to make evidentiary decisions mid-trial, and you got to be able to do it.
Sure.
So,
Because there are some judge positions, I think, in New York State, although they're moving away from it, that are not attorneys. But
there are some
this
judge
level.
positions, yes, absolutely, that are not attorneys, but they don't hear felony level cases.
Right.
They hear misdemeanor cases, and those cases are reviewed on appeal by the county court judge. So
Sure.
if there is some kind of miscarriage of justice based on a lack of understanding of the law, it's pretty quickly and easily reviewed.
And it was brought up that all four candidates actually have quite a bit of increased experience as attorneys, more so than previous judges that were previously judges here. Is that true? Or?
I don't agree with that. I think it's a little bit misleading to say that, because both of our sitting judges in county court right now, Judge Sherman and Judge Rowley, both sat as judges in Ithaca City Court,
Okay.
which is a misdemeanor level court. So while they may have taken the bench with less than my 22 years experience to hear misdemeanors, they had experience as a judge before they moved up to county court. Now,
Okay.
none of the candidates in this field have any experience as a judge, and that's where my additional almost a decade more experience than anybody else, that's where it really comes into play, and that's where it's really important.
Sure.
Another reason experience is important is because you make decisions that are essentially predictions about the safety of our community.
Right.
The judge is going to be deciding who is going to be given the benefit of an alternative to incarceration. So while we as a community, we don't want to squander human potential, and I'm committed to alternatives to incarceration when it's safe and when we're not going to be wasting money, because let's
Right.
face it, everything's always cut. We're in a terrible
balance.
situation these days where funding from on high and the higher levels of government are constantly being cut, and this county is very often on its own.
And it ends up costing more money if a client is actually put into maybe incarcerated instead of doing something that's going to be more constructive for their life. And in the long run, I think it ends up costing the taxpayer more money anyway. So those are kind of decisions a judge is going to make.
Absolutely, and you need to know who will benefit from that alternative to incarceration, and you need to essentially make a prediction. If I let this defendant out in an alternative to incarceration instead of incarcerating them, is this community going to be safe? And
So in some abstract way, judges could be looked at as fiscally judgmental in some ways, because they do affect probably the state budgets and the state taxpayer rolls and everything else.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
That's an interesting insight.
Yeah.
So when you are called upon to make that decision, it's important to just have a lot of experience with a lot of different people. And since coming here in 1995, I've had something like 12 or 1,300 individual clients.
Right.
That's not including people I've represented kind of over and over again.
And experience as an attorney, it's been a varied experience.
It's been a varied experience. I started my career in New York City in civil litigation, and then I worked actually in election law for a while. I was a staff attorney at the New York City Campaign Finance Board, where the New York City does public funding for local elections.
Right.
And I was a staff attorney at that agency. And then I moved here to Tompkins County in 1995 because I wanted to live in beautiful Tompkins County. I first came here in 1983 as a student at Cornell.
Right.
And I came back to live here permanently in 1995. And, I looked around for a job. I wrote to various attorneys in town And then I found out that Tompkins County doesn't have a public defender's office, and they have an assigned counsel program, and you could, basically open shop as a private attorney and get cases and have work. And
right.
so I explored that a little bit, and actually talked to my boss in New York and found out what he thought. You think I can do that? And he said, I think you can do it. And I came up here, and we have great lawyers in our community, and everybody was helpful, and I was very open to contacting everyone and saying, I don't know what I'm doing yet, can you help me out? And I got a lot of help. But my intention was really to find a job in a firm and, do real estate closings and wills and, just general practice.
Sure.
But within a month, I realized that
The community directed you to do what they needed to do, probably.
Well, I realized that it was really fulfilling to me to personally represent people
Sure.
and develop relationships with people and, help them out and lend a helping hand when I needed to. I would like to continue that as judge and continue to lend a helping hand, both to the people who appear before the court and the community as a whole, because everything that the judge does reverberates within the community.
You're on the Democratic slate. However, why is it important to be an independent thinker as a judge and a judge candidate, basically?
Well, independence is important because, I consider the justice system to be the foundation of our freedom in this country.
Sure.
And fairness is the foundation of the justice system. So you need to make sure that you're not beholden to anybody, whether it's a political party or a government agency. That way, people who appear before your court have faith in what's happening. Everyone who goes to court half the people will walk out unhappy because they will lose.
Right.
But it's very important for people to feel heard and for people to feel understood, and for
Not
people
like a bias, basically.
Right, for people to accept the outcome. So if you have a judge on the bench who has a clear bias towards one person or an individual or a way of thinking or a gender or a government agency, then you sort of, in a way, we lose a little bit of our freedom.
And we get those feelings from people like Judge Scalia on the Supreme Court level. As an example, I'm a Democrat myself, and that's one of the reasons why I did this thing tonight. I think that we do get a sense that some judges seem to be a little less independent. What kind of life experiences made you particularly more independent than tending to be biased in some areas?
I would say that it is well, first of all, I've always been a very open-minded person. I was raised to be an open-minded person. I was raised to be a Democrat. I was raised to be liberal and progressive thinking, and that I attribute to my father. And I tell a story about how I became a Democrat when I was 6 years old and Nixon was running for re-election, and I asked my father why he was...
Do you really remember Nixon very well? I mean,
Not very well, but
I'm older than you.
I remember this.
Quite a bit.
I remember Watergate, but I remember this story because it made me a political person for the first time. And I said to, my father was not voting for the president, and I said, and my dad's a lawyer, and he's, has a lot of opinions, and I take after him quite a bit. And I said, why aren't you voting for the president? And he said, because we're Democrats. And I said, that's it, I'm a Democrat. And as I grew and developed my own personality and my own view of the world, I realized that I do share this progressive thinking. I do believe that it's important to help our fellow citizen, that it's not all about me, and what I can do for myself. And as we move into our 21st century government, it's actually, I don't agree with this corporatization of America, and
Sure.
And I believe the Democratic Party is kind of the best place to stand up for these values that I have, and I see firsthand with my clients, these are the people that the resources are not trickling down to.
Right.
And I feel that one of the things that motivates me to run for judge is I feel it's important in this political climate that we need all hands on deck locally.
Sure.
So we're not going to be getting a big influx of cash to help people, climb out of the cycle of poverty. So we need everybody who affects these people to really be thinking.
Right.
And it's very important that we have a judge who doesn't just say, okay, I have a person who's come to me and they have a domestic violence problem and they're working with DSS, and I'm just going to let our agencies take care of everything, it's very important that the judge knows what's available.
Sure.
So the judge makes the final order, you know?
Right.
It's not the social services department or the probation department or the district attorney who makes the final order, it's the judge.
And law is a little bit similar to medicine in some ways, in that you have an algorithm, and the more fingers that the algorithm, the more sidebars that the algorithm, sounds like a pun, but that the algorithm has, the more flexibility you have, and I suppose the more you're able to be independent. What can you do as a judge, a sitting judge, without being political, to try to increase those algorithms, those algorithmic choices?
Sure, I have a couple of ideas. One is, what I've noticed as an attorney, and especially as an attorney for children, is that I just don't always know enough what's out there. And, I think the judge has what someone once wonderfully phrased to me as convening authority.
Right.
Meaning, I might not be able to order people to get together and talk about solutions, but I certainly would have a big voice if I asked people to get together to talk about solutions.
You bring that up. Are you able to, as a sitting judge, I know I've heard this in various venues on national levels, where you have a local judge, maybe a county judge, that decides to direct somebody to a program that's like non-traditional, that's not even in place. Maybe it's quasi-community service, but they're using kind of the fullest extent of their authority to do that. Is that something that you can add to that algorithm in an independent way, or is it something that you see as a negative thing?
Well, you have to be practical and know that if the program doesn't exist, you can't send them there, but
Right.
maybe you can use this convening authority to see if these programs can be developed, and maybe they can and maybe they can't. But, the judicial powers in both family court and in criminal court in these dispositions/sentencings
Right.
are really quite broad. And, if programs are available in the community, the judge needs to know what's out there, and the judge needs to make sure all the lawyers know what's out there, so that when we're coming together, especially in family court, when we're coming together and we should be sitting at a table with the judge and the lawyers for the lawyer for the child. Remember,
Right.
the child always has their own lawyer. DSS doesn't represent the child.
Sure.
So you have the lawyer for the child, the lawyer for the parents, and the lawyer for the agency. We need to be coming together as a team and coming up with solutions. And we need all hands on deck.
Right.
Because
I just heard about a recent, you may have heard about it in the news, where an individual found, just by chance, he was a homeless guy for 10 years, had a drug problem. He found a duffel bag with $3,300 in it, and make a long story short, he was already working in a homeless shelter. And I think if you take somebody that's, let's say, homeless, and you have the ability as a judge to maybe have them do community service in a homeless shelter, and that may not be part of the existing, infrastructure of but it's an existing program. It seems like you would have some more flexibility about putting somebody into the area that they're actually having the problems with, but they're working with other people, and they're actually helping other people to learn how to help themselves.
And that's exactly the kind of creativity that I think we need. That's a great idea, and I want to be open to ideas. I'm not going to solve all these problems myself, but people in our community have ideas, and we can't be compartmentalizing, saying, it's one agency or another agency's job to come up with the solution. It's all of our jobs. It's the judge's jobs, it's the lawyer's jobs, and it's the community members' jobs.
And you can be informative as a judge, telling people about things that they really don't know that they have access to. A lot of the people that come into your court probably aren't aware of their options.
Right, absolutely. A couple of things that I noticed that people really could use that I know exist in this community are things like financial education. When someone has an abysmally small paycheck that people get today with our minimum wage, I know Alternatives Federal Credit Union has a program where it helps people learn how to save and learn how to budget. And especially when you have a young person, a 16-year-old kid who maybe has their first job and maybe is in foster care, you want to make sure he's not blowing his whole paycheck small paycheck, but, let's teach them that a little bit goes to savings, and, you don't want debt, and,
Right.
maybe you can one day save and buy a house, and then they can live the American dream too.
What kind of things are you allowed to, briefly in the community to do as a county court judge, interacting with the community? Are you allowed to do certain things in regards to, either giving talks or talking about programs or whatever, non-political?
Oh, sure. Anything
I don't
that's
see
really,
that very much around
anything that's not really supporting a candidate or fundraise. You can't fundraise,
Right.
So I'm on the board of the Tompkins County SPCA. So, if I'm elected, I'll actually be chair of the board next year. If I'm elected, I can't take an active role in the fundraising.
Right, right.
So I couldn't get up at a dinner and ask people to contribute.
Right.
I could get up
can
at
still
a dinner and talk
volunteer.
about how great the Tompkins County SPCA. Look, I'm plugging the SPCA.
That's right.
First no-kill
That's no
shelter in the
problem.
country.
That's a good thing.
It is a good thing. And so it's, so there are some limitations, but it really has to do with supporting political candidates, and fundraising are really your limitations. And you don't want to, you want to be careful around causes that are, that may come before your court,
Right, right.
things like that.
Now, you've been an attorney for children. How has that shaped your career, I guess?
It's shaped my whole perspective on what I do, because every case in family court is about the children.
Sure.
Just about every case. You have some domestic violence that's between adults, but if there are children, it's about the children. And I've represented almost 300 children at this point in my career, and from what I actually
Might have represented.
more than that, 300 cases, almost 300 cases representing children,
Right.
and so sometimes they're sibling groups, and you understand how children feel about the court process. And one thing that I know is that no matter what the outcome is, where these kids would live, for example, in a custody case, they don't want their parents fighting
Sure.
over them. And so one of the things I hope to do is institute for a program of collaborative law for people who are eligible for assigned counsel. I don't know if you're familiar with collaborative law, but it's a fairly new, probably 10, 15-year-old program. It's been here in Tompkins County for about 10 years, where people who are divorcing agree not to go to court, but to resolve their issues through a series of meetings. And the focus is changed from what can I get to what would be best for me and my children.
Sure.
and my soon-to-be former spouse. And I know that the collaborative law group here in Tompkins County had come up with a plan on how to apply collaborative law to the assigned counsel program.
So are you allowed to do that on the county level?
Yeah, there is a plan in place, and I certainly intend to seriously consider that plan and work with the collaborative law group to try to get custody cases and,
Okay.
and domestic violence cases if possible. It's hard with domestic violence cases, but get these cases solved in a more collaborative method, which is, it takes the litigation out of it. And if
Right.
you take the litigation out of it, it helps the children.
Sure. I have a couple minutes left, and one question, just very briefly, if you want to answer, what your experience with some type of contract type laws over the years, is that, do you feel that's significant enough? Because we do have a lot of construction here.
Yes, in fact, my first job in New York was civil litigation. And one of the things that I did is represent, well, both sides actually, but often insurance companies on coverage disputes.
Okay.
And it was not why I went to law school. I'm
Sure.
much better suited for what I do. But which is really essentially a contract dispute. So I spent about a year doing that as an attorney, and then also a year in law school.
Because you will have cases
doing
like that as a county.
You will definitely have civil litigation, and they will often deal with contracts, and I feel ready for that.
Okay.
I do, and there are general legal principles that apply throughout. Contracts are all about the words, statutes are all about the words. I do a lot of appeals, they're all about the words. It's
Sure.
about the language, the meaning, and the intent, and I think one area translates well to another
Now,
area.
you have an opportunity to do, a little bit of closing, maybe for a minute or so. You can also, I think you qualified for something before this candidacy. You might want to talk.
Yes, I would like to talk about that, in fact. One thing I hear a lot about a lot of people comment, what makes a good judge? I don't know if someone's qualified to be a judge. Well, the New York State court system anticipated that. And what they did was they set up these commissions called the Independent Judicial Election Qualification Commission.
Yep.
And a judge on a voluntary basis, a judicial candidate on a voluntary basis submits an application, which is actually rather lengthy. It asks, all about your career and, your last 10 trials or appeals, and, asks for, I think I gave them 15 or 20 references. And then you have this big group interview, and
So you qualified.
I went through the process and I received a rating of qualified.
Excellent.
None of my opponents have received a rating of qualified. So this independent body has determined that I'm qualified.
Very good. Well, it was a pleasure meeting
Thank you,
with you.
Scott.
Yes, and I'm sure
Appreciate
the
it.
public will get a lot of information from you and to make a very good decision.
Can I plug my website?
Sure.
pamforjudge.com.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.